Hi everybody, my name is Eddie. I have been learning 3D modeling for about a year now, and I've recently gotten into sculpting, so I wanted to make this video going over a time lapse, just kind of explaining my process and hopefully giving a little bit of confidence to people who are also new to this, who maybe don't think they're the best or it's too hard. So, like any sculpt, I just start with a simple block out. This is essentially just establishing the kind of main forms of whatever it is you're trying to sculpt. And I've done a little bit of sculpting of humans as well, and it's the same principle, but people are just a little bit harder than a dragon, such as in this case. And I think the main reason for that is just that I think as people, we're very kind of attenuated to the correct proportions and whatnot of what a human face should look like. And so if any little thing is off, it's going to be a disaster. A dragon or any fictional creature gives you a little more flexibility. So I'm just kind of placing some general features. I did kind of skip over making those little horns. That was done very quickly. And I'm just kind of playing around with the shape. That's really all, trying to establish sort of how I want everything to look. I played around there with adding like a kind of like a fat pad to the head, but it didn't work out. And then I ended up just kind of sculpting it in manually with a clay brush. Again, just more refinements, not a whole lot to say in this step. I decided it's going to be a Chinese style dragon, so I did place some whiskers, sharpened up those horns a little bit, and copied the whiskers down as well, which I actually do end up removing later. But here you can see some of my kind of noviceness to ZBrush. I didn't know how to cut those whiskers off kind of properly. I did end up learning how to do that sort of after the fact, but you know, the most important thing is, even if you don't know how to use the software, or you're a novice to sculpting, is that you just do it and you will improve over time. I sculpted out a little beard just using a sphere and appending it as a subtool and just messing around with it like that. You will see later on, though, a lot of these features do end up changing. I ended up going with a different beard, and even with these eyes, I ended up doing something a little different. But it was good to just kind of get things in the right place, just to know. So now I'm starting to add a little more detail. You can see that I already have kind of some nostrils, and Chinese dragons typically have these very kind of round, I guess, lips. I'm not really sure what they are, but I just used a mask for that, and then just used the inflate brush and just kind of pulled it out a little bit. And then again, making a little more adjustment to the proportion. Now that I have those lips in, I wanted to make sure the face kind of had like an interesting shape. And so I moved things around a little bit to just make the mouth a little bit more sort of curved. Adding some inserts for where the whiskers will go. I did a quick save there, and for you it'll probably show up as blurred. I don't know if there's anything sensitive in there, but I'm a little paranoid about that kind of thing. A lot of the reference images had these kind of scales. I mean, typically the entire dragon is scaly, but I had these kind of more obvious scales on the sort of mouth, and so I wanted to get those in as well. And then I also placed some eyebrows, which is another thing I end up redoing later. And so one really important thing that I'm a bit stubborn about is kind of going in with a clear plan and sort of using good reference images. What I did for this was I just had Google Images on my right monitor, and I just typed in Chinese dragon, and I just kind of jumped around. It's kind of better to actually collect references with a little more intentionality and use something like PureRef, so that you don't end up having to change as much later. You can kind of make some decisions early on, and if you can make concept art, that's even better. But in my case, I sort of just shot from the hip, so to speak, and so a lot of things do end up being adjusted and changed, and probably in the end could have been a little better with more planning, but I'm still pretty happy with how it turned out. So initially I was going to have his mouth closed, but I ended up wanting to actually have an open mouth, and again, this is sort of a knowledge check. I didn't really know what the best way to do this in ZBrush was. What I ended up doing was just splitting it apart by masking that area and just using the split subtool option, and then just dynameshing it back together. I don't know that that's the best way. If somebody knows a better way to do it, then let me know, but that's kind of what I did. It's what I figured out. The reason I'm not sure that this is the best is that it requires a lot of cleanup. You can see a lot of the geometry is kind of messed up. There's a lot of holes and stuff, and I basically just have to manually go through and fix all of that. So it is a lot of work, and I don't know that this is necessarily the way that it should be done. Probably the most ideal thing, again, would just be to plan these things out in advance, but if you do have to fix it, I'm sure there's probably an easier way than what I did. So I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. Trying to remember. Oh, it looks like I was trying to only have the bottom part visible so I could kind of carve in this lip, and I didn't know how to do that. So again, I don't know how to do a lot of things in ZBrush, but it's just kind of a matter of going for it, and then, you know, you figure things out as you go along, and then you do another project and you learn a little more along the way, and you follow some tutorials for some projects too, just to kind of get a more comprehensive deep dive into a project, see what a professional would do, and follow along, and then you can apply that to your own. Right here, it's a lot of refinements. I don't know what to say. I was messing around with this beard shape. So one of the references I saw in Google Images had like a kind of curved beard, and I tried going with something like that, but it's another thing that I ended up scrapping and going for something else. But I did find, you know, that for creating kind of the texture of the hair, it's really good to just use like a clay strips brush. It kind of already has the correct alpha and detail already sort of in there for hair. It just creates these kind of clean lines, and you can use the damn standard brush to sort of indicate the kind of clumps of hair a little bit better. But like I said, I didn't end up going with that particular beard, and there I finally delete those bottom whiskers. Again, doing a lot of little refinements, and then it looks like this was the point at which I decided to start sculpting some teeth in. I wasn't really initially sure how I wanted to do this. To me, it felt intuitive that these kind of round bits are lips and that the teeth should be inside. However, I found that if I did that, then again, a lack of planning on my part would mean that I would kind of have to adjust the shape of the bottom jaw, and it ended up being too complicated. So I decided that instead, you know, I would sort of treat these round lips as gums, and a lot of the references I watched sort of did this anyway, so it's fine. Somehow I ended up with these spikes. I must have accidentally grabbed it when I wasn't paying attention. I had to fix that real quick. But back to the teeth, I just sort of built it into this gum, and then just kind of built up the form around it a little bit. And I do go back in and refine all of this even more later, but right now it's still not like the final detailing stage. We're still placing some pretty major features, and teeth would be one of those. So I do find the little gizmo for moving things around in ZBrush to be a little bit awkward to use. I find that Blender's hotkeys and axis locking are just so intuitive and easy to use. But of course, ZBrush is so much more fluid for sculpting. It's really just the performance that I like using it for. Also, in the future, I've been relying a lot on Dynamesh to make this, but I think it would be better to only use Dynamesh at the beginning when I'm blocking out, and then just Z-remesh and then just subdivide. Instead of doing what I did. But again, I've said it probably 3 or 4 times, this is another instance of just lack of planning. And so really maybe that's the biggest thing I should take away from this, is just really having a concept in mind, being very deliberate with the concept references that I use. But, you know, not a huge deal. It still ended up being a decent final product in the end. It just meant that I had to fight with it a little more. So I'm still just placing teeth. It's really not too complicated, just a lot of duplicating the same thing. and adding a little bit of curvature to it. In hindsight, I think I would have liked to make these teeth look a little different, as I think they look a bit too scary. I think when I think of a Chinese dragon especially, as opposed to like a Western style dragon, I sort of picture kind of elegance, or it's really kind of like a beautiful creature. And so I don't know if making these teeth so scary is the right move. If I was doing a more Western style dragon, like from European fairy tales or whatever, I think this makes a little more sense. They're a bit more reptilian. And I suppose in a sense this ends up being kind of a cross, since I do end up adding like scales to it that also look a little bit more, I guess, Western. So I suppose you could say this is a mix between a Chinese dragon and a like a European or Western style dragon. Anyway, that's a little off topic, but I was just placing teeth for a lot of that. That's really all. Here I finally kind of start going into a bit more detailing. I add a little bit of indication of those horns being made of like bone or something by just adding a little bit of carving into it. And then I go around the gums again, and we're just kind of building up around those teeth, really kind of selling the illusion that this is a real dragon and that those teeth are kind of connected into the gums. I end up redoing the eyebrows here. I don't really know why, honestly. I think they looked fine. But I decided to go with something a bit more simple, and I mean, this also looks fine. It honestly looks very similar, so I don't know. Maybe the original was a little better, but hard for me to say. And then here I decided to do something different with the eyes. So originally I'd sort of sculpted the eyeballs into this very elongated shape, but instead I decided to actually give him eyelids and a more spherical eyeball, something a little more typical of creatures you would see on Earth. Although I suppose with a dragon, it isn't real, so you could do whatever you want. But I thought that this looked better and made a bit more sense. So I just kind of mask out where I want those eyelids to go and just pulled them up and just did a little bit of finer detail to shape them in place. And then I also added kind of a slitted eyeball. I thought that made sense. It looks very reptilian and just kind of generally goes with the overall vibe of a dragon, I would say. Here's another attempt at the beard. I think this ended up being my final attempt at it. You can see throughout the time lapse I had sort of tried multiple beards and was never satisfied. I'm not sure that I'm fully satisfied with the final look, but eventually, an important thing as an artist is to just be able to tell yourself that something is good enough. It's good to not, slave away at one project indefinitely, when really, you could just complete something which will help you improve and then use those lessons on the next thing. Here I go for a tongue. The tongue isn't really super visible, and so I didn't particularly care too much about the shape or the look. I tried to make it a little more pointy at the front. I thought maybe that would look good, but again, it didn't really matter all too much, and I think what I ended up with there is more or less the final tongue, just without the alphas added. Okay, so again, more refining. Here I decided to build up around those horns a little bit, make it kind of feel like they're really attaching into the skull there, and then going in with the damn standard brush and adding these little creases and kind of indication that maybe the skin is kind of folding there or something like that, or maybe it's attached to like a muscle. Not really sure, but whatever it is, I think it looks pretty good. And then similarly with the horns, just kind of going over with the clay strips brush. Clay strips brush honestly is like the best brush for adding texture to anything. It just lends itself to a lot of things very easily. It's good for making trees, muscles, bone. A lot of things just happen to be really easy to put in with this brush, and so that's what I ended up doing with the horns. I think it looks kind of bony. I actually think it could have probably used a little less of the clay strips on it, but I still think it turned out pretty good. Same thing, going back over those eyebrows. Again, just a simple clay strips brush. And here's the beginning of detailing the gums. I spent a lot of time on this. I really could not figure out how to get these gums to look the way I wanted. And eventually I decided to use a brush that I have from Flip Normals. The entire time I was just using the base ZBrush brushes, and for some reason I was really stubborn about just adding in the brushes I have. Or it's really less stubborn, it's more just laziness. I just really didn't feel like doing it, even though it takes 2 seconds. But I ended up using a brush from Flip Normals that I think was better than the clay strips brush, just because it's a little less aggressive. And I think it worked okay for the gums. The gums are probably ended up being one of my less favorite aspects. I think my favorite aspects are going to be just the overall shape, and you'll see with the kind of reptile skin alpha that it looks, I think, pretty good. I think the teeth and the horns look pretty good, but the hair features and the gums, I think, are areas where I'd really like to kind of figure out a way to improve at. But yeah, I spend a lot of time on this, and I try various things. Here I go again, clay strips over those teeth. It just happens to work very nicely and gives the teeth kind of that bony texture that you would expect. And then here I decided to download some alphas from online, just looking for kind of dragon or reptile skin, and eventually I find something that I like. I actually download a pack, and you're going to see here that I end up testing out a lot of the alphas until I settle on one that I like. And we should see here, looks like this is the one I settled on. Or I guess I restart, but I think that is the final alpha I choose to go with. But not before doing more refinement to these kind of bigger scales on his snout. Eventually you start to, oh yeah, a little bit of fat pad there too, I thought looked good. Eventually you start to zone in on all these details, and you find yourself questioning, is anybody even really noticing like what I'm doing here? Like that minor adjustment to the scales on the snout, does that really matter a whole lot? But anyway, I finally go in with the alpha, and this kind of brings it all together. Now, I think as a beginner, it's probably very easy for me to over-rely on this to kind of bring things to life. And so I did really try to get something I was happy with before finally doing this. The advice I learned online is to really try and save this for the very, very end. Because it is kind of almost like a crutch. It sort of adds a lot of texture immediately, without really a whole lot of display of skill. Anybody could just, drag those alphas over the skin. And so, I tried waiting, and then I masked out the gums because I don't want those textures on the gums. And again, I'm going over it. I don't know at what point I end up using the Flip Normals brush, but yeah, I really slaved away at these teeth and the gums for a while. But we are pretty close to kind of the final form of this thing. It's looking pretty close to what the final product looks like, which makes sense because in this time lapse there's only about 2 minutes left. But again, just a little more refinement. I am using the Flip Normals brush at this point, I believe, and I'm using it to add a little more finer hairs to the beard. Again, the beard is one of the few things I'm a little unsure about, as well as the gums and the eyebrows. Everything else I am fairly happy with, though. Accidentally opened GeForce Experience there. Gotta love it. Gotta love NVIDIA and their weird shortcuts. And then kind of adding just a little detail to this. I don't really know what this is supposed to be, but it's on all the reference images. It's like the gums kind of go into this circular appendage. So I just assumed it's kind of a part of the gums and just kind of detailed it the same way. And again, I think it could have been better, but it's very hard for me to know what to do with a detail like that because I'm not really even sure what it's supposed to be. And so maybe I could have done more research. Again, it's that planning thing that I talked about a lot, but yeah, just detailing. We are very close to done here. I did a decent job of kind of indicating where the teeth go into the gums, and we are getting quite close to the end. I don't really have a whole lot to say. It's I think I've done a decent job of explaining everything, but if you do have more experience with ZBrush and for some reason you're watching this, definitely throw me tips. I'm a beginner, and if there's anything here that's clearly wrong, unoptimal, could have been done in a better way, go ahead and just let me know. I mean, I want to improve. So decently happy though. I'm still a novice. I haven't been sculpting too long, but I think I've improved pretty quickly, and I am fairly happy with this. I thought I was getting pretty close to the end. I think I am, but I'm kind of afraid to click anything because I don't want the voiceover to end. I haven't used Premiere Pro in a while. I used to make videos on this channel, but I haven't in a long time, and now I don't really remember a whole lot about this software. But here I'm, again, just adding a little more indication of where the teeth go into the gums. That's all this really is. So just kind of pulling this out and stretching the gums out over the teeth a little bit. I think this is one of the last details, though. Oh yeah, I do add a little bit of alphas to the tongue. Probably could have just used like a regular human skin pore alpha for this, but I ended up just using one from the I think from ZBrush actually. I don't know. Like I said, it doesn't really matter just because the tongue is so hard to see. A little bit more creases and indication of the hairs on the beard, and that's it. So thank you for watching. If you have any tips for me, let me know in the comment section. But that was the sculpt. And also for the people who are watching this who are less familiar with what it is I do and post on social media, that's kind of what that looks like. That's what sculpting looks like, and it's a whole lot of fun. You should get into it. All right, thanks for watching. See ya.